Welcome to Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean. We're back with another episode. There has been a massive gap between my episodes, and I do apologise. Life has got in the way. The kids sort of relocating, and I know it's not an excuse, but the podcast has just taken a back seat. But I'm trying to, bring it to the forefront, get it happening again. And I've got a great episode here with Catherine Sherlock where we talk all things mindfulness again. So, she really invests and unpacks mindful leadership and questions some of the stereotypical beliefs on mindfulness and mindfulness in leadership, especially around self-awareness and needing to be present all the time, and potentially that's not possible and not tangible. So I love that Catherine really sort of unpacks that and challenges it in many ways. And I think we need to do this in all aspects of our lives. So this is a really, really nice episode. It was recorded a little while ago, so it's not a new one, but I do have new episodes coming, which is super exciting. So, this is a real deep dive into mindfulness, into mindful leadership, and to sort of question and explore what mindfulness might mean to you. So I hope you like it. My name is Luke McLean. I'm a life coach, I'm a leadership coach, and I do a lot of work around life, leadership and culture, and especially wellness in those areas, culture, well-being, and living more connected to your authentic self. So yeah, that's what I do. That's the point of the podcast, is to really sort of have a deep dive of conversations around people that I think that are living authentic, that are living connected to their true self, and try to sort of explore their journey and find how they've gone about that, and then share those insights, share those teachings and practices with you, the audience. So, I hope you like the podcast. This is a great episode. If you want to check a little bit more out about what I do as a coach, it's just at lukemclean.net, and I've got a whole bunch of free meditations, free talks and resources, so you can check that out at your own time. So this is Conscious Conversations. This is Catherine Sherlock, and please take care. We'll talk soon. So Catherine, I'd love to begin the conversation just around your upbringing in mindfulness, and especially, reading a little bit about yourself. That you had a lot to do around sustainability and environmental consulting as a starting point, and love to, so much in especially traditional mindfulness, connection to nature and, environment so important. So I'd love to get your story on that at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure, because it does actually lead into it. It's a big piece of it, actually.
So where did that start for you, Catherine?
Well, I was doing, I am very interested in the environment and the health of the environment and our health and sustainability. And I was working in that field as a consultant for a long time. I have a master's in environmental studies. And yet I didn't feel like I was making the impact that I wanted to be making. And at the same time, I had kind of my feet in two different worlds, because I had my private sort of personal development, spirituality and that piece. And then I had my work, and they didn't really meet up. And the more I looked at it, the more I felt like we were not going to come to the levels of innovation and solutions that we need to come into this world on the path that I was on as an environmental consultant. I didn't feel like I was having the impact I wanted. And for me, that came into changing consciousness. For me, that path out of it means that we are going to have to deepen and enhance and elevate our consciousness. Because I think that where we are limited in perspective. And so when I think of elevating consciousness, I borrow a metaphor of a building. So think of a building, a high-rise building in summer in a large city like New York on garbage day. So if you're down on ground level, it's very noisy. It's probably going to be pretty smelly. There's all kinds of things going on, and that's the perspective that you have. But if you go into the building and you go up, up each floor, you still have that knowledge that you had at the base, at the ground floor, but you also gain more perspective. You can now see things that you couldn't see from down there. And even as you go up, if you go all the way up to the penthouse, actually the air quality changes. You can see the entire landscape around you. You can realize, oh, there's a river over there. I never knew there was a river there, or whatever. So you suddenly have this different perspective. And that means that opportunities and choice points that you didn't have on the ground floor open up. And so I think that's what we need to do. We need to begin that journey of leadership that is a journey of consciousness.
Yeah. I love that metaphor, Catherine, because I think that's people can connect to that and understand that image of being able to see different perspectives. And I don't know about your past, but so much of traditional mindfulness in more a spirituality perspective talks about, right or wrong perception, and that being the starting point. And I'd love to hear more about how you're connecting that to leadership and what that journey around perception is, and how you get that across to leaders to sort of almost look through life through a different lens.
Well, I think one of the things is not right or wrong perspective, but enhanced perspective, greater perspective. So you can hold a truth, but it's a small truth. I don't know, like disease is caused by, you could say one piece, disease in the body is caused by one thing. Take your, pick what it's caused. It's caused by something physical. But then you can enhance that perspective and realize, oh, it's not just physical, it's also maybe mental and emotional. And that's a higher truth. That's a greater perspective. So that's a simple example of kind of that enhanced perspective of realizing that there's a bigger picture there.
Do you think, Catherine, with that, like some leaders especially have a perception or a perspective that they think's causing them, joy and fulfillment, but really it's actually causing them suffering in a different view?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, take things like some of our gold standards, like in emotional intelligence. I do not think that is leading us to mental health and emotional health. And the more I look at it and research it, the more I uncover big issues with it. Now, people think that's it, like they think that's the standard for emotional health, or that's the standard for emotions in the workplace. And yet I've uncovered research that suggests people who are victims of workplace bullying have high emotional intelligence. I've uncovered research that says that EQ is good for followers, but not for leaders. Now, personally, I think everybody should be a leader, at least in your own life. Like, we all need to be leaders in our own lives. And so if it's turning us into followers, we have to question the very dynamics of it. And so I think there's a lot of stuff like that. And because we are so left brain and so mental, I think leaders struggle with this a lot because, they are very intelligent. Well, at least most of them. They're very intelligent. They're intelligent people. I mean, that's what got them to the place. It was either that or manipulation. But let's talk about the ones with the ones that got there because of their intelligence and their hard work. And so, for a lot of people, that means that they're very mental. They're very left brain. And so, coming into a place now where we actually learn whole brain thinking, where we come back into a balanced place. Because what happens when we're too left brain is that we actually struggle against ourselves. And a lot of what we're taught is we're taught actually to struggle against ourselves internally.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, Catherine, in terms of the emotional intelligence. And I'd love for you to unpack a little bit more, because you are right.
so many businesses and so many people that you talk to around, especially around mindfulness and around, doing the work at a leadership level, automatically gravitate to emotional intelligence as being the go-to program or learning to be a more mindful leader or a more mindful person in many respects. And the second part of that question is, and I'd love to get your thoughts, because in Australia, or in my experience, so many leaders now in big companies I feel, have got on their ability to follow, as opposed to their ability to critically think and to almost add diversity or a point of difference to the company or organization. It's almost there's a lack of diversity in leadership thinking.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, in a funny way, that emotional intelligence doesn't help that, because
No.
it's very easy to appear emotionally intelligent if you don't bring up the difficult conversations, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of times in these situations, it's not, the difficult conversations are not being brought up, and that's not a healthy environment. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, well, we're just talking about, that ability that a lot of leadership these days has been, being created, and those positions are being created on not always the ability to be innovative or think critically, but that following piece, and people just following, but maybe have maybe have high amounts of emotional intelligence as they measure it.
Yeah, well, the other thing I think that can happen is that emotional intelligence can lead you to be the adult in the room. Now, on the
Yeah.
surface, that sounds like a good thing. I mean, we saw, what was that article? Was it the New York Times? I can't remember. That was talked about when, President Trump, about being the adult in the room, about there were people who were the adults in the room, and, you didn't need to worry because they were there. The problem with that is it's not healthy. It's not healthy to be the adult in the room. And if you are the adult in the room, you are tolerating stuff you shouldn't be. It's not, there are times when, yes, you will need to be the adult in the room, but it's not a situation that you should be staying in, because it is going to be a situation where it's going to be leading to emotional unhealth. And then also, being the adult in the room doesn't resolve the problem. It just keeps it managing. It just keeps it going. It doesn't actually come to a resolution. And I think that's another piece with with EQ, is that it's not leading you to resolve emotions. It's leading you to manage emotions. And that's like playing checkers with like a checker game that's never going to end. Is you just keep moving pieces all the time, as opposed to learning how to process and digest emotions and actually come to resolution. Because it's the emotions that make our thoughts sticky. And so thoughts aren't sticky once you resolve the emotions.
Yeah. Catherine, can we just dig into that? Because I think you've hit something really beautiful there, but maybe for some of the people listening, what that really means in sort of in normal terms, in terms of sticky thoughts and being able to actually get to the, almost get to the foundation of the problem and actually build the relationship with it that can cause a resolution, not just a management perspective from there. And why mindfulness, or why your view on mindful leadership's different maybe to others as well.
Well, mindfulness has become kind of the same idea as be here now or be in the present. It's kind of become that same kind of concept. And I think that was when that kind of got pulled from Eastern thinking. I think it was because it was very attractive to a Western mindset, because it's very mental. It's like, okay, I'll just manage my state and just be in the present all the time. There are a few issues with that. I mean, one is that Well, actually, there are many issues with that. Come to think of it, there are many issues with that. I mean, for
The
one
first,
thing,
yeah,
our consciousness is so complex. We have,
yeah,
these layers upon layers of knowledge, of awareness, of ideas, of emotions. And that kind of suggests that there's like one present moment. There
mm,
isn't. There can be a present moment where I am, head down on a task, or I am aware of my body, or I am aware of somebody else. Like the consciousness moves, right? And there is not a single present. And it isn't linear. And that sort of suggests that it's linear. And it's what you actually want is to have awareness. Because if you can only have about 5 to 7 things in your conscious awareness at a time. And you don't want to have it so hard fixed that you can't actually move and allow other knowledge in. How can I explain this better? So, for example, if you're trying to stay in present all the time, that's a very mental activity. That's likely to
yep,
put you into a beta brain state. Okay, that's a task-oriented brain state. It's very, very useful to us. We absolutely need it. But we're not meant to stay in that brain state all the time. And to do so is very exhausting to the brain. And so people who practice mindfulness for a decade or more actually can end up with a kind of fractured consciousness. So you need those other states of brain states where you move into more slower brain states. So learning to operate from a more relaxed state, from an alpha state, is a much better use of the mind and the consciousness. Because from an alpha state, you can pivot into beta if you need to focus, or you can pivot into even slower brain state where you can allow intuition to come in, where you can allow kind of the knowledge that's kind of tickling around the edges of your subconscious or your conscious to come in. You can access it. But if you push yourself to stay in beta all the time, if you push yourself to try to be in some present that doesn't exist, you can actually lose access to that greater knowledge.
mm. Is that for you, Catherine? Is that sort of your view on sort of like a more focused attention as to a more open awareness, where sort of how I've always talked about it is like that. The difference is like, it's like, imagine you've got a camera that can only focus on one part of the sporting game and you only ever see it through that lens. And then when you watch a game of basketball or football, there's multiple cameras that see it through different perspectives, and you get a completely different view of the game because you're seeing it through, a longer distance, a different angle. And that's sort of how I've tried to describe it, around that sort of more open awareness, or that sort of different view, and being able to see life differently and hold on to things, closer or further away, depending on the moment.
Yeah, Luke, I think that's a really good metaphor for it, to be able to access all those different perspectives and not trying to just keep this one single perspective all the time, because you're going to miss out on so much. And it's
Yeah.
also, I think it's a fear-based perspective, right? That fear, I've got to stay in the present, I've got to stay in the present, because we are so fear-based. And I think the only way out of that is to start to realize how fear-based we are. How fear-based our functioning is, and begin to pull that back piece by piece. So yeah, I think that's a great metaphor.
And for you, Catherine, do you see that a lot of people also, like, the ability, unless you're very disciplined and practiced in meditation or mindfulness, it's very hard to stay in the present all the time anyway. Like, as you said, it takes huge amounts of energy, and a lot of people probably feel like when they can't do it anyway, they're failing and not doing it right, and then they give up altogether.
But yeah, and the other part of that is you're not in the present all the time.
No, yeah, that's
As soon as
right.
you get
That's the
as
other.
soon as you get triggered, you go completely unconscious. So
Yeah.
if you're telling yourself, "Oh, I've got this down. I'm in the present all the time," you're
No.
actually missing that. You're missing the fact that you've just gone unconscious, and it's happening all the time. Like it's just not. yeah, it's just not. I don't think it's a. I think we have to step back and say, why are we doing these things? Why are we doing these practices? What's the goal here?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. When I'm, say I step away from work and I go to make lunch. And, mindfulness would tell me, well, I need to be in the present. So I need to be aware of, the knife in my hand and how it feels as I chop through the vegetables and all that, and as it hits the cutting board. And that's not what I do. What I do is just relax. I just daydream. And it's a time when I come up with all kinds of ideas. When I solve client problems, when I have new information come in, because I have just let my mind relax into that place. It's like, the story of trying to find your keys or trying to find something that's lost. And you're looking and looking and looking and looking and you can't find it. And finally you give up and you think about something else and suddenly it
Yeah.
pops into your head, right? And that's the kind of intuitive whole brain thinking that I think a mindfulness effort can take you away from. It can actually make things harder. No, I think there's a use in it. I mean, that's why the original teaching was there. There is a use in it because it's very easy to spend your time in the past feeling angry or casting yourself into the future feeling anxious, right? And so bringing that back, being able to bring that back from the future or bring it back from the past is useful. But on the other hand, if those emotions are coming up again and again, rather than like continually fighting them, you're better off to find out what's going on there and actually resolve the emotion so you don't have it dragging your mind. So you're not in this constant battle back and forth trying to be in the present because you fear the anger or you fear the anxiety.
Yeah. That's such an important, I think, teaching, Catherine, or such an important dissertation of this, because a lot of the time when we're, I love the making lunch, and a lot of time that for me, especially like when I'm even going for a walk, I might mindful walk for the first 5 minutes. And what that does for me personally is that then it puts me in a state of centeredness, of stillness and calm. For the rest of my walk, I almost feel like I've got more ideas and a better foundation for that intuition. So that for me personally, that's really helpful as that starting point. But I don't try to walk mindfully for the full 45 minutes. I'll use it as almost a starting point, and then a lot of the work ideas and a lot of that comes to me. And one of the teachings that I had, Catherine, that was really important for me was this just question of, is it useful? So like, is it useful to be thinking about work or worrying about that right now? And if it's starting to be a problem, either coming back to the present moment, or as you're saying, investigating where that thinking or where that story is coming from, and really trying to unlock almost the foundation of that rather than let it just take up space in your thought stream. But a lot of the time in our life, that's actually not a problem. We are daydreaming, or we're thinking, or we're future planning that's actually not causing us any stress or any hindrance. And for me, I don't know, that's my perspective. That's okay as long as we're aware of that and we can come back when we need to, and focus if it's work or our family. That's completely fine.
Yeah, for sure, Luke. Because people apologize about daydreaming. I hear people apologize about daydreaming all the time. And it's like, no, that's good for your brain. Like your brain needs to go to theta during the day. It needs to go to gamma and theta and be in those states. Those are healing states, and they are essential for creativity and innovation and just avoiding burnout, right?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, you can't sprint a marathon.
Yeah, you can't. Like I said, you. I mean, and right now, I mean, burnout is a huge problem for leaderships. I mean, I've seen like 96%. I've seen studies that say like 96% of leaders are feeling at least some burnout. And our technology right now is part of that issue because our technology also keeps us in beta. So, it used to be if you were standing in a line, you might just stand in the line and sort of daydream. Now you stand in line, the first thing you do is whip out your phone, right?
Yep.
And you're checking things on your phone. And not only are you putting your mind more towards a beta state, your brain towards a beta state, but also rather than listening to yourself, your phone is listening to other people's perspectives.
Yep.
So
Yes. Yes.
you're
Yes.
getting very disconnected on two fronts. Like it's two pieces of getting disconnected from the self and being in a brain state that's not a recovery brain state.
Mm. Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, that. So, Catherine, so what do you, with higher mindfulness and the work that you're doing? How are you bringing in mindfulness into leadership, into life, in your sort of your unique way of this, and how do you apply it? And what does that look like in terms of your business?
Well, that's a pretty big question. I think it starts on an individual level by asking what you want, rather than just accepting things like emotional intelligence, or accepting the mindfulness practice, or accepting a meditation practice. That you start with, what actually are your goals?
Yep.
What are your bigger goals here? And then let's match. Let's not just take the default, because the default doesn't get you very far, right? Let's make this empowered. And then also, I talk a lot about purpose, and we have seen when purpose was brought in to business, what a difference it made. It's actually solved a lot of problems like engagement and a lot of the problems that are very common in business. Purpose solved those issues, and it solved it as kind of a side thing, right? It wasn't even known that it would do that. And at the same time, those businesses that have brought in purpose have actually done better on average financially. So what I talk about is elevating purpose. I think there's a next level to take it to. And I talk about incorporating the awe and mystery of this life. I think what's happening for a lot of people is they're living a life where what they really want has been put on the back burner. And,
Yeah.
that may be spirituality, or that may be whatever. And they'll be like, yeah, I'll get to that someday, when such and such is done. And I think we need to switch that conversation. And one of the ways to do it is to begin to bring in concepts of the awe and mystery of life. Because when you put yourself in that larger conversation, that bigger conversation, it pulls you up effortlessly. The same way purpose has pulled companies up effortlessly, right? Putting yourself in that larger conversation, making sure that that stuff isn't on the back burner, that you actually integrate it. I think that is the way of the future. I think that is the way that we are going to get to higher places of leadership, where we're going to get to more innovation and creativity in terms of solving the things we need to solve. So that's a big chunk of it. And then also, emotions. I think that we need to, the one place I think emotional intelligence has been useful is that it's opened up an awareness of emotions in the workplace.
Yeah.
And it's opened up that awareness of emotions. I think we need to take that further and really realize how profound and far-reaching the effect of emotions are in our lives. We need to give up this concept. There is no objectivity. That's been scientifically proven as false. We need to realize that emotions are really big in our lives, and we do not have the skills right now to deal with them. And we're dealing with them in a way that makes us struggle against them.
Yeah.
And so coming into a place where you learn a different relationship to your emotions, which is then a different relationship to the self.
Yeah.
Right? So I talk a lot about leadership from the inside out. and that inner space, and creating that inner peace where you're not wasting all the time and resources in struggling against the self, where you open up more and more levels of freedom. That's what consciousness to me is. It's more and more levels of freedom. It's more and more levels of opportunity and choice.
Yeah, I love, Catherine, how you talk about levels. It's something that I haven't really heard before, but for me, I'm just writing some notes. It makes a lot of sense because, we talk, I talk so much about with my clients relationship to the self. But I love how you add the levels to it, because that, for me, visually, I can see people sort of sit at a real surface level. They might be a little deeper, but maybe not at their truer self. Like they might not be their most authentic self, but they think they are. But it's like, what would it look like if you just went down another level or a little bit deeper and built that relationship a little further? It just opens up the door to a different conversation in terms of what does that mean. And I actually really like that language, and I think that was really profound. And I can imagine the clients would really love that.
Yeah, and it's something that I think that when somebody tells you they're enlightened or they've got it all together or whatever, they're kind of stuck in a left brain place where they can't actually hear what's going on with them, because it's not your growth doesn't stop, or you don't. Honestly, if somebody tells you they're enlightened, I would run. Just run, because it's just like, no, it's not like that. It's a continual growth. And if you choose that, you will continue to grow throughout your life, and you will continue to reach new levels.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there's this perception and there's this also a perception that people are looking for someone who's transcended or enlightened or been to that position and thinking that that's the answer. But I almost think they feel that from a quick fix perspective of I'll be able to get there because they are there. And I'm completely on board with you. It's in my perception and everyone that I've spoken to, it's not like that. This is not what life's about. And again, I love you talking about purpose, because I do a lot on purpose as well, Catherine. And so many people that I speak to actually don't have a clear purpose in their life and aren't living from a place of purpose. And for many people, I don't know about you, but it's scary for a lot of people, because when they start to do that inner work and build that relationship, sometimes they discover actually how far away they've created a life from their purpose. And it's almost scary for them to think about the job or career or lifestyle they're living and realize that that's not me. That's someone else's perception of me. And I've been conditioned almost to live this way, but it's not fulfilling me.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, Luke. And I think that, that can lead to depression or dark night of the soul and all those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a hump that we need to help people get over, because first of all, we need to help people realize that that's a pretty common experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also that, that's a part of being human, but also that we need to embrace ourselves in a more loving way. We need to embrace our emotions in a more loving way, in a more accepting way. I mean, one of the pieces that I think is absolutely essential is self-compassion. I mean, there's a lot of talk about compassion in the workplace right now and empathy in the workplace, but you will not, if you like, and that's true of emotional intelligence too. It's one of the things I'm concerned about with the model, because it has empathy for others, but it doesn't start with self-compassion or self-empathy. And when you put empathy for others into a model without starting from empathy for the self, you will end up with poor boundaries. You will end up with taking on other people's emotions and stuff. And you'll just burn out. So.
And do you think, Catherine, like that starting point does that almost open the door for leaders to then want to just fix others without wanting to do the self work first?
Sure, it's a danger, because you're not, it's just that when you start with self-compassion, your compassion will roll out naturally. Your compassion for
Yeah.
others will roll out naturally. You won't have to make it. You won't have to, develop it or anything. It will just come because you've started with compassion for the self. And you won't be taking on people's stuff, and you won't be. Yeah, I don't think you'll be trying to fix people. You'll be from a different perspective.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember just reading a book of Thich Nhat Hanh's, and I forget which book it was, but it was just really simple but really profound. He's like, you can't, and rightly or wrongly, but he's sort of saying that it's hard to love someone else or have compassion for someone else if you don't have it for yourself first. And it was just a really aha moment for me to realize that that's, again, the starting spot to all this for me is me, not someone else. And that self relationship to self is the starting point, because that's who you bring with you every day as well. Like when in every conversation you bring yourself, so you've got to start with you.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And I think the place, you were talking about people, we were talking about kind of that dark night of the soul and the, feeling overwhelmed by not being in the right place or not knowing your purpose. I think the first place to start, I think this is a gift that leaders can give to themselves, but also to their people, is getting people out of overwhelm and into empowerment. And that means, because right now people are so overwhelmed, they can't think. And so the idea of taking on something new, like they are looking for the hacks, they are looking for the, the meditation hacks and the whatever hack, because they simply can't take on something else. And by freeing up, by teaching people how to be empowered in their inner space, that changes the conversation. That opens up much more energy, many more possibilities. And so we have to teach people how to stop fighting against themselves. And that's the other issue I have with emotional intelligence and mindfulness is I think that they lead to places where you're almost becoming more overwhelmed. Like if you're trying to be mindful all the time in the present, you can end up very overwhelmed. And if you're trying to be aware of all of your emotions and everybody else's emotions, again, like what's the purpose in that?
Yeah.
Right? Like let's talk purpose. Let's talk what's your bigger goal? Because especially for a leader, if you're now focused on all your emotions and all the other people's emotions, when do you have time for the bigger picture? When do you have time to move to a greater level of consciousness?
Yeah.
So I think that's, all those pieces of getting out of overwhelm, a larger conversation of purpose, thinking about consciousness, thinking about what it is you really want. I often talk about the term success. And we all have, there are many, many ideas in the world of what success is. And we all carry bits of them in our brain. And so that can leave us struggling internally. And the way out of that is to define success for yourself. So you define what success is, and now when you see somebody else having success, you can go, you don't have to feel like, oh, I've missed out or I haven't measured up because I don't have that kind of success. You can go, no, this is what success means to me in my life. And I can let those other voices go and those other agendas go that aren't mine to start with, that have me switching back and forth, swinging back and forth between all these different ideas of success, because I've now defined it. So defining things in your life is really also another essential piece. And a lot of times we go through, like I talked about that stuff on the back burner. It's kind of on the back burner. We never get around to defining it.
Yeah.
And so we never get empowered around it.
And do you think, Catherine, like I'm just thinking, I'm just taking the words in as you're saying them, and that idea around success, like people's story or the narrative they create around what success is and isn't, often if they don't have purpose and a clear, connection back to self, they'll get I'm almost thinking that they'll get swayed into what success is, and it's actually not their version of success. It's someone else's projection upon them, and that they'll chase after that, thinking that it is theirs. But because they sort of don't have their grounding back to themselves, that they might get that success, but it won't bring fulfillment, because it's actually not connecting to their true purpose. Is that I'm just sort of taking that in and thinking that could be a problem if people don't have purpose or a grounding back to self.
Yeah, for sure. That's really common, right? There are lots of people who chase after something their whole lives and then they get it and they feel really empty, right? Because it's
Yeah.
not, in fact, some of them, some of those people, like actors or actresses and things, look at all the drug problems and things, or the alcohol problems, because they did chase it, they did get it, and then it was like, wait, this isn't quite what I was expecting. This isn't actually filling me up.
Mm.
Right? So I think,
Yeah.
and I think that these things that, even definitions of success or definitions of development, personal development, or definitions of spiritual development, those can be something that you define, but then leave open to change. Because again, as your consciousness changes, as you go up those levels of that high rise,
Yeah,
and
for
you
sure.
change perspective, then those definitions will change. That
Yeah,
even
I
your
love that. Yeah.
purpose, right? Even your purpose will open up in a different way or change.
Mm.
So I think it's, people get really caught up in trying to find their purpose and things like that. You know what? Just find a working one. Find a working purpose. This is going to change as you deepen, as you elevate, as you grow.
Yeah, I think that's really good information, and almost is it sort of, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be a guide, because as you said, it will change. Catherine, I'd love to talk to you about, because this has been such a insightful conversation. Like, if a leader's listening to this, like, where does someone start from your perspective in terms of, firstly, building that relationship to themselves and developing a purpose or a deeper consciousness, and then using mindfulness or using those techniques to sort of start to build that relationship?
I think you start with just thinking about your goals, what you really want, what's missing right now, and what where the gaps are, what's missing, and what you actually want to achieve that you maybe haven't put your attention to yet, or you just want just the things that you want to achieve, or you want to. I mean, achieve isn't necessarily even the right word because that suggests outer, but outer and inner. I think you
Yeah.
want to combine both of those things and bring them together. The other issue I see with people, and I certainly have had this in my own life, is a swinging between outer stuff and inner stuff. And I think that it's really makes it a better conversation in the world within you if you can bring those together, so that you're not kind of doing inner development and then going, oh my gosh, look at the outer stuff that's kind of fallen by the wayside, but you actually bring that together into one piece and have the balance of those, so you're not swinging. So I really focus on getting out of overwhelm and into empowerment. So, and a lot of that, certainly a central piece of that is the emotions, is
Yeah.
learning a different relationship to the emotions, to your emotions. And, and that takes some moving out of the status quo. And I think there's a lot, when I'm working with people, it's a lot about moving out of the status quo. I mean, none of my stuff all my stuff, kind of questions the status quo. From mindfulness to emotional intelligence to just the way we approach emotions, even to the ego. I don't have the same perspective on it that's out there. And it's learning to not be fighting against the self. It's learning to have more inner peace, have more inner freedom and outer freedom. And to when I say change the relationship to the emotions, we've been taught that negative emotions are bad. And
Yeah.
so what happens is when we have them, there's an unconscious, sometimes conscious feeling that I'm bad if I'm angry. I'm a bad person for being angry. We have to change that relationship to realize, no, it's not, it may feel unpleasant. It may feel, unsettling, but it's not a bad emotion. There aren't bad emotions. They all have something to tell us if we learn how to listen to them. And when I talk about digesting emotions, it means that you actually take and feel the emotion, and you take the gem of wisdom from the emotion, and then you're able to release the rest of it.
Yeah.
But I
And that,
think that is really our next. I think the inner space is our next frontier, and I think the emotions are what will decide who advances in that frontier or not.
yeah. And there's like one of the, I don't know if you research or study this, Catherine, but like in Buddhism, like there is this teaching around going against the stream, which almost talks about leaning into the suffering and the struggles that we face and not trying to avert and push them away, which we naturally do. And again, in their teachings, it's sort of not trying to always attach and grasp onto the good emotions because they're impermanent as well. And it sounds like that's very similar, is the idea around when we do struggle and when there's anger or when there's, worry, doubts, those things, is not trying to push them away, but to actually learn from them and lean into them and realize what's happening here.
Yeah, I think that's true, Luke. That's a piece of it. I mean, there is certainly, and that comes with the meditation, right? Meditation on the breath is not my favorite meditation, but, I change it up to make it useful, but I don't think it's that. It wasn't designed for a Western mindset, for one thing. Not somebody who's already been through a very left brain education system.
Yep.
But the idea is, or one of the ideas sometimes is that you meditate and you watch the stream of thoughts. You just watch them objectively go by.
Yeah.
And I think that's useful because it does teach that, oh yeah, there is this stream, and we're not our thoughts, and we're not these emotions. But on the other hand, if you go too far with that, then that's all you're doing is you're watching them, and you become kind of disassociated from them.
Yes. Yep.
Right? And when you disassociate, you actually create this disconnect within yourself. I think that's happening a lot with our emotions, a lot with the idea of the ego. It's actually a dissociation from ourselves. And there are teachers out there who teach it, who say, oh, avoid the pain body at all costs. But that's not, you're never going to become whole when you've got that inner disconnect. Right? Because it's that fear-based place that you're operating from.
Yeah, and it's almost, and you almost see people doing that and practicing that, and it becomes almost a bit of a zombie state of you're not feeling anything, then you're just watching everything.
Yeah, for sure. I know, one of the people making big money and writing big books on that idea, he's admitted he doesn't feel the bad emotions, but he also doesn't feel the high end positive ones. He doesn't feel joy or happiness. He just sort of feels this flat area in between. And I don't think that's living. I don't think that, that's what people are striving toward as enlightenment. It's like, are you kidding me? You only want to have this little piece of your consciousness available to you?
And the words make sense, and I think people read them, and people, especially when they read the books of that particular person, read the books, and because they're in such a state of stress and overwhelm, it makes them want to go to that place because they're so far the other way. But I think the conversation we're having is there's a middle ground where you can flow into not attaching to those feelings and emotions and not becoming them, but learning from them, but also being able to experience the good ones and sit in the bad ones and not just have that numbness of nothing. And if he's not the most out there sort of person. You can see he doesn't feel a lot and doesn't sort of show those emotions or feelings too much. And I'm with you. I'm sort of, that's not the person I want to be anyway.
Yeah, and I think that because we have been raised so left brain, that those practices that are pulled out, like in the present, or the mindfulness practice, that are actually teachings within much larger teachings. They weren't meant to be teachings in and of themselves, have been pulled out, and they're attractive to us Westerners because it's like, oh, it's a left brain thing. It's it's a controlling thing. I like it. I can get on right? And it's like, no. What we really need is to be moving toward whole brain, and that's going to take a different road altogether. It's like kind of like what Einstein said. We're trying to solve the problem with the same level of thinking that got us into it in the first place.
Mm.
And I now think that it's time for us we have to move to different ways of thinking that completely upend how we have thought, different ways of consciousness, and whole brain thinking if we are to become innovative and creative and be able to face some of these issues like sustainability.
Yeah.
I
think, and I'd love, before we finish, I'd love to, because I'm always interested in this conversation, but again, what's your relationship and what do you think, Catherine, like, where does spirituality fit into this? Because for so many leaders, especially when you talk about that's the taboo subject because it's not left brain and it's floating in a bit more into feelings and emotions and where does that play a part, do you feel?
I don't usually talk about spirituality that much. I have actually with you more than maybe any podcast I've done, which is funny. But I kind of didn't talk about it because maybe I didn't want to get boxed, or I didn't want people to be boxed. But I think that when I talk about things like the awe and mystery of this life, of living, right? That energy, that bigger, that living with, when you're living with purpose, you're living with an idea of something bigger than yourself, something greater than yourself,
absolutely.
Right? And so I'm talking about elevating that to a new level now, of including the awe and mystery of life, of including maybe some of the bigger questions, of making sure that you as a leader are in that conversation. Because by being in that conversation, change happens. Transformation happens. And it happens without the slog of things like mindfulness. You actually are wiring your brain in new ways, right? Which I don't think you're doing with mindfulness.
I think it's, and I think because people box spirituality into like a religion or a tradition that's what it is, and I like the awe and wonder and the connection that there's something bigger, like there's a bigger purpose than just us. And because I almost flip it, Catherine, and think that if we don't have some sort of connection to something bigger, and that we put ourselves in a box that there's just us, there's just our community, there's just our work, and that's all there is, and there's nothing else that really matters in life, and that's all there ever will be. And even, as you'd know more than anyone, to walk in nature, if you walk into a rainforest, that's, for me personally, that's that awe and wonder and that connection to something bigger that I experience. And I do try to get that a lot with clients, to take them out in nature, because it naturally gives them perspective outside of their own box of thinking straight away.
Yeah, and there's research to show, I don't know if you've read Last Child in the Woods. I forget the author's name. it's at least a decade old now. But he actually looked at all the research out there around nature and how it affected humans, and it's really interesting stuff. Um, there's one, for example, one research study of prisoners in a prison, and one of them has like a view of the courtyard, and the other ones have like pretty much no view, like a view with a brick wall or something like that. That little bit of green, that little bit of connection to nature, meant that they spent less time sick, less time in the infirmary than the ones that didn't have any view. And that's just one of a whole bunch of studies. Like there's just a ton of studies in there. But I think, I mean, that's that disconnect again too, right? This idea of environment and then us, or as something separate, as opposed to we are the environment. There is no separate.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, and I think that you raise that idea of the fear of going into spirituality, or the fear of going into emotions, or the fear of going into the woo-woo. I think that losing that fear, like that's part of the overwhelm, right? And losing that fear is really essential to go to the next level, to go to the next level of freedom. I think that's what we're always doing, is rooting out those fears, and especially because we have been raised so fear-based. And as you start to see that, and you start to go, yeah, I see that now. But it's only then that you can begin to change it. It's only when you have that awareness, when you meet yourself where you are right now, not where you want to be, but where you are right now, right? That real change can happen.
And that connects almost, Catherine, to that, like, in a word that I love, is that sense of like that equanimity, to be with things as they are, not as you'd wish or hope them to be, like that, to be equanimous. Yeah.
And at the same time, though, this is a piece that's really important to me, is aspirations, is making sure. So when I'm looking at working with somebody, I'm looking at two things. Where are their challenges? What's going on right now? Where are they right now? Where are their challenges? But what are their aspirations? And maybe they haven't even spoken them for a long time. They're so buried, right? But having those aspirations is the same thing as purpose. It pulls you up. Having that focus on them, putting that focus on them, opening up that conversation. It's kind of like the wonder of life. Having that focus on aspirations. Also,
even those two questions would help someone to find a bit more purpose, wouldn't it? We're talking about leadership, like, what are your challenges? What are your aspirations? And even from those two questions, you could get a pretty good foundation of what your purpose might be at this particular time.
Yeah. I think it's also helping people to open up to the parts that got shut down.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a piece of aspirations, because we've all put things aside that and sometimes aren't even aware of it.
Yeah.
Right.
And talk to me. Sorry, keep going, Catherine. I had one other question before we finish.
Go ahead. I don't know what I was going to say.
I wanted to talk to you, like, you doing leadership work, and I do quite a lot. Like, talk to me about your relationship, or how do you talk to the ego in leadership, especially when you're working with some, managers or leaders or CEOs that perhaps have a view of the ego or don't have a view, but it's there.
Okay, so one of the things we didn't talk about, that I talk about a lot, is shifting from a perspective of self as enemy to self as ally. I think this is absolutely essential. It's absolutely key. And the ego, when you're talking about ego, you're talking about self as enemy. So we have this idea of ego, and I hear leaders talk about ego all the time. So I'll give you a challenge. For the next little while, when you hear people talk about ego, listen to the tone of voice that they use. You will find that they are talking like in a voice dripping with contempt about this part of themselves. So we take this idea of ego, it's like we make a little box, we label it ego, and we throw the stuff that we don't like about ourselves or that we're afraid of in this box called ego. And then within our psyche, we kind of push it across the room, right? And try to avoid it. You've now created a disconnect in your psyche. You've now created something that you will struggle against.
Yeah.
Every day. Right? You've now created internal strife. So the secret is, don't do it. Don't create a construct called ego. It's not a term I find myself using that much personally, but I did a while back I heard myself use the term ego. And I was like, oh, well, what do I actually mean? Like, what am I saying in that? And what I realized it was pride. And when I looked at that closer, I was like, well, what's pride? And when I looked at it closer, I realized that it was me saying what I could do. It was me talking about my abilities. And that was pride because as a young girl, I was taught that girls don't brag and girls don't brag. And bragging is even saying what you're capable of. So you can imagine that was not serving me well in business. Right?
For sure,
right?
Yes.
But only if I had just left it as ego, I would have just kept struggling against this false thing, this false dichotomy that I had created. And that's what we're doing with our egos, with our emotions, with all these things. And we have to move from self as enemy to self as ally. To stop seeing the self as bad, to stop seeing the self. Because if your self is enemy, anytime I talked about, the bad emotions coming up and feeling like a bad person, you won't want to let those into consciousness. Because every time you let a bad emotion into consciousness, you're going to feel bad. So you're going to want to keep them out. So now you have limited your consciousness.
Yeah. That again is a really great insight. And I think we're very aligned in that, Catherine, where I look at it as we've got a relationship to everything, and we can have in everything with our food, with our media, with our devices, and with ourselves, we can have a healthy relationship or an unhealthy relationship. And there's always that possibility of it going from healthy to unhealthy or unhealthy to healthy, and being really clear about what a healthy relationship to the ego looks like that feeling of being healthy and using it to help propel you and serve you, or what could an unhealthy relationship to it look like. And similar to what you're saying is self as enemy is that unhealthy relationship, and self as ally is that healthy relationship.
Yeah, I just think the ego is a construct, so I just sort of don't use it.
Yeah. So you've removed it altogether.
Yeah, I just think it's a false construct.
Which I like. Which again was constructed. It became popular from the same guy that wrote the other books too, which he spoke a lot about ego, and I think everyone sort of jumped on that after some really popular books that spoke about the ego.
Yeah, well, the ego goes back Freud wrote about it, and who else wrote about it? I can't remember, but way back, right? Thousands of years. And I think they all have slightly different.
Yeah, that's what it is confusing.
But I just think that taking it's the way we actually set up ourselves as enemies inside, and it's the way we set up to struggle against ourselves. And it's not. It's these things are not. These things won't. Like, they take some effort to unlearn because they are so deeply embedded. Right? It's like it's like, oh look, there's another one. Darn. But it's they're there, and it's part of being human. And the more you bring them out into the light of day, daylight them, then the more you do change consciousness, the more freedom you do have, the more inner space you have, the more peaceful inner space you have.
Yeah, that's a huge word in a space, but the idea of having, I forget what you said, like having that inner harmony, that inner peace, which we haven't spoken much about, but that again, that feeling of overwhelm that a lot of people, or especially a lot of leaders, don't have a sense of inner harmony or really a feeling of deep contentment with what they're doing, and that can be problematic, and that's usually because there's a lack of space.
Yeah, there's a lack of there's that fighting within the self, right? And so
Yeah.
learning like the ego, fighting against the ego, not to do that anymore. How not to do that anymore? How not to fight against the emotions? How to actually bring them to a place of resolution rather than this struggle against them or this constant managing of them. You know, how to deal with self-doubt, how to deal with all those things, all those pieces. That changes and that frees up all that energy to now focus on what you want to focus on.
Yes, that's important. Yeah. Catherine, it's been a great conversation, and I'm deeply grateful to be able to spend the hour with you and talk about that. If people want to get in touch with you and work with you, how do they go about that?
They can check out my website at www.highermindfulness.com, and they can email me from there. They can email me at Catherine with a C, CATHERINE at highermindfulness.com, and they can follow me on LinkedIn, where you'll get lots of content, more content like this.
Yes,
lots of content that'll keep you thinking.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I follow Catherine on LinkedIn and love her posts. So that's how we hooked up with this conversation, and I'm really grateful that we did. So it's been awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luke. It's been great.